everybody. So good to see you. Hey, can we just take a moment and say thanks to DJ and to the band for leading us? That was awesome. So talented. One of these weeks he's going to come out with a xylophone and play from that. He's so talented, and I love that song we were just singing. There's a line in that song that says, "Here I raise my Ebenezer." And that's a weird line. I grew up in a church where we sang that song a lot. And I remember there was an old guy at our church named Ebenezer, and I always thought, does he know? Is he cool with that? We're going to end that way today. But that line, and Ebenezer is, in the scriptures, it's a remembrance stone. It's a way the people of God for generations have marked moments and reminded themselves of God's faithfulness. And what Nate did a few moments ago when he gave us those impact totals. That's an Ebenezer. That's a way to remember the faithfulness of God to this community, through this community. I hope somewhere along the way at the end of 2019, hopefully as you look back over the decade, you had some Ebenezers, you had some moments you could kind of remember and mark the faithfulness of God to you, to your family. It's the rhythm of doing that allows us to anticipate and look to a new decade and to anticipate God's goodness and faithfulness to us in 2020. I love that. Here I raise my Ebenezer. We're going to continue the series together today, Expectant Not Anxious. We've been in this for the last 8 weeks or so. And the heart behind this series, if you're new with us, is really this idea that we want to be the kind of people in the age of anxiety, which is what sociologists, psychologists call this era that we're living in. Not necessarily that people have more problems than they used to, but people do tend to be more anxious. This is what poet W.H. Auden calls the age of anxiety since 1947. That sort of defined this particular era of human history. And as the people of God, we are to be people, again and again, people of expectancy, which means when most people show up in a room, or they show up in a moment, or they show up in a parent-teacher conference, or whatever it is, most people go into those moments sort of anticipating and expecting the worst, going, I know hell's going to come to earth. I know everything is going to unravel. I don't know about you, but you meet people all the time. Me too. We have a fatalistic mentality. It's all going to go wrong. And for the people of God, that we would be the kind of people that show up in moments expectant of what our God is going to do, even the difficult moments of life, that we would know it doesn't have the last word over us, and that our God is the God who's constantly bringing heaven to earth. And if that's true, we should show up in moments as the church, as the people of God, as individuals, saying, I wonder what God is up to here. I wonder what God is doing in this and what God is doing through this. And I want to look at this metaphor today that's given to us in the scriptures, in particular by David in the Psalms. We looked at David last week in the Psalms, where he talked about this idea in Psalm 27 of gazing and seeking and displacing the idols in our life with the bad sort of false idols that could be good things with God. And he said to gaze and seek at the beauty and the goodness of God. And I want to take a look at this metaphor that's used again and again in the scriptures. There's a lot of metaphors in the Bible for God. There's two that are really dominant. You see again and again, God is referred to as Father. When you pray, you probably pray, our Heavenly Father. That's a good thing to say. That's a defining image of God. Jesus is a king. That image is used. God is a king, that he sits on a throne, that Jesus says again and again over 160 or so times in the New Testament, he's bringing a kingdom into this world, a certain way that things ought to be. But there's this metaphor, this picture. It's a little less common, but it's pretty common in the Psalms. Around 15 times, David says that God is his shield. That God is his shield. And I want to take a look at the origin of that. What does it mean? And as you pray this week, that as you step into moments to pray that God would be your shield, it actually takes a lot of confidence to pray that prayer. Because if you have a shield, well, maybe I could say it this way. You never see anybody with a shield while they're at the beach, do you? I'm yet to see that. You only see somebody with a shield when they're standing in a difficult moment. They're anticipating difficulty, and they're expecting or waiting for a favorable outcome. And yet this is the image that's given to us in the scriptures, that God could be and God will be our shield. And so I want to look at why that is, what does that mean, and sort of ask that question, do we have the courage, do I have the courage to pray, God, be my shield? If you have a Bible, you can turn with me. We're going to be in Psalms in just a moment, but we want to start in Genesis chapter 15. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. You can follow along on the screens or download the Church at RB app. That's a great place to follow along as well. We're going to start with this guy named Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. Father Abraham had many sons and many sons. All the good Christians right there know that song. It comes with marches and movements. If you grew up tormented by those songs like I did, they sort of still are in there. You can still pull those out in moments. Father Abraham, we meet him in the scriptures before he had many sons, Genesis 12. Father Abraham was he was a pagan, essentially. Walter Brueggemann, a famous theologian, says that he's a metaphor for all hopelessness in life. He's not doing well. His wife is well along in years, and she's barren. She can't have a child. He's well along in years. He's essentially not following God at all when God finds him. And yet God raises him up and says, I will bless you. You will be a blessing to the nations. This is sort of a beautiful thing. It's this sort of promise that God makes to Abraham. Well, in Genesis 15, Abraham doesn't feel very blessed. And he's in conflict. He's anxious about it. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He entered into a military battle against some surrounding nations, and he was victorious, but he knows that these 5 kings, are going to retaliate, and he's fretting, and he's fearful, and he knows this promise God's made, but at the same time, he's like us. He's going, when, how, what? And this sort of fascinating conversation and moment takes place between Abraham and God. Genesis 15, we'll start in verse 1 together. This is the Bible. Okay, here we go. After this, the word of the Lord, I'm out of tricks. The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram, because I am your what? Your very great reward, he says to him. So right there, by saying, I am your shield, notice he doesn't say, Abram, I'm your beach towel. He doesn't say, I'm going to be the cool, steady, calm breezes of life. He says, I am your shield, which means this is going to be difficult. You should anticipate problems. You should have a sense of anxiety. That's okay. That's normal. But I want you to know, I want you to be expectant that I am your shield. And on the other side of it, he says, and I am your very great reward. Now, when I read that, I think of them as mutually exclusive. You're either going to be my shield or you're going to be my great reward, but they're connected. And the idea here for the people of God would be that through the difficulty, standing in confidence in the difficult moments of life, the moments that give you the most anxiety, you would know on the other side of the battle, on the other side of the difficulty, God's not just protecting or shielding, but there is a great reward. There's some kind of inheritance. There's something that is awaiting on the other side, that God does not allow difficulty into your life for difficulty's sake. But there is something through it, there's something in it on the other side, a reward that comes, some kind of benefit. Be expectant of that. Be anticipating that. In Abram's case, it's an inheritance, but he goes deeper than that. It's a child as well. Part of Abram's frustration, he becomes Abraham later, is that he doesn't have any children, and God's promised him this land, and Abram said to him, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me? Since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you've given me no children, so a servant to my household will be my heir. And his frustration is, well, God, you promised me this land, but what do I care? I mean, after I die, it sort of ends with me. I want a child who can actually inherit this land. And so God says to him, then the word of the Lord came to him, this man, Eliezer of Damascus, will not be your heir, but a son, this is Isaac, Ishmael, who is your own flesh and blood, will be your heir. He took him outside, and I love this about God. I love the cinematography of our God. I love this. He takes him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And I imagine he whispered to him in this moment, Abraham, one day they will sing songs around the world. They will call you Father Abraham, who had many sons, and they will march and they will dance in Vacation Bible School. This will be fulfilled. But Abram doesn't see it. He's sort of on the other side of it going, all I know right now is there's 5 kings coming to kill me. All I know is I've gotten myself into a skirmish. And God said, I want you to sort of anticipate, expect the good that is on the other side of this. And then this sort of bizarre interaction takes place. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? This land, this territory, these kids. So the Lord said to him, not what I would have said, bring me a heifer, okay, a goat and a ram, like you do, each 3 years old, along with a turtle dove and a partridge in a pear tree, which is where we get that song from, and a young pigeon. This is very strange. Abram brought all of these to him, and then he cut them in two and arranged the halves opposite each other. Don't worry, we don't do this in church anymore. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. The birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Now this, it seems odd, it is odd, but in the ancient world, this would be it would be custom, it would be very, very, very normal. In our mind, in the Western, Greek mind, we think in terms of bullet points, lists, contracts. If you and I were going to enter into some kind of arrangement, real estate, financial, we'd have papers drawn up, we'd sign the documents. The Eastern mind, certainly the ancient mind, does not think that way. It's images, that's the power that binds you together. And so what you're doing in this moment, he's preparing to sign an ancient contract or an ancient covenant. Anyone here a notary? Anyone? No trustworthy people here at the 10 o'clock. They were all at the 8:30, apparently. Or you are a notary, but you don't want to be stopped 10 times on your way out, which I admire. If you are secretly, I want you to see how easy you have it in the modern world. What you would do to notarize or to draft up an ancient contract, you would take an animal, a goat, heifer, whatever it may be, you would cut it in half, and if you and I were going to enter into an agreement, some kind of contract, I would walk between the pieces of this carcass that was on the ground. And then if you were going to enter into this contract with me, you would do the same. And it was a way to say, I will allow myself to be torn to pieces before I violate my contract or my word and my bond to you. Sounds gross, and it was, but I bet they had fewer broken contracts in the ancient world. This was a way to, I will be torn to pieces before I allow myself to violate my covenant and my word and my bond to you. And so this is what Abram does. He cuts the animal in half, very normal way to notarize the agreement in the ancient world. And it says that after he does this, as the sun was setting, Abram, he's still distraught, he's still disturbed, fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And then the Lord said to him, and again, God's trying to let him see, I'm your shield, I'm at work, I'm doing something. On the other side of this, there's a good thing. The Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years, notice the timeline. For 400 years, your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. And so his sort of promise to him is, know that for 400 years, the people of God, they're going to be in slavery in Egypt, the Pharaoh, Egyptian captivity. Anyone else ever been frustrated at God's timing before? Yes, this is Abram. He's the first guy to go 400. Are you kidding me? 400 years. And then notice this is the promise, because he says, I will be your shield. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, 4 generations it will take. Your descendants will come back here. And I love this, verse 17. This is one of the most powerful images in the scriptures, one of the most the cinematography of our God. I love this, verse 17. When the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch, 2 dominant images for God in the scriptures, appeared and passed between the pieces. This is the carcass that's on the ground. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant. The word covenant in Hebrew just means to cut, with Abram, and said, to your descendants I give this land. And in the ancient world, this would be so shocking. Gods do not enter into contracts with mortals. That's not how it works. And yet God has said a promise that extends from Abraham to Jesus, from Abraham to you. I will allow myself to be torn to pieces as God before I allow myself to violate my promise and my covenant with you. That's the nature of our God. And he says to Abram, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be faithful to me. I want you to continue to obey me, even when it's difficult, even when you don't understand, even when logic would say go in the other direction, cut and run. I want you to obey me as a faithful general, that you would trust and know that I am not leading you into a death march. I'm not leading you like a lamb to slaughter. I am leading you as a good, kind, and faithful general, and I want you to trust me, and I want you to obey me, and I want you to know that the outcome of this is favorable. I want you to know that I am your shield, and even when you're wounded, even when you're injured, even when it doesn't make sense and it's frustrating, even after 400 years of captivity, I am still working, and I will allow myself to be torn to pieces before I violate that contract and that covenant with you, Abram. And the same is true for you. That when you step into a relationship with Jesus Christ, as part of the people of God, he's made this covenant, he's made this contract with you, that as God, as your heavenly Father, he will be your shield, which doesn't mean there will be no difficulty. It means in the difficulty, the most anxious, the most fretful moments of life, the most fearful moments of life, you should expect and anticipate that on the other side of it, just like Abraham, there is some kind of inheritance, there is some kind of reward. It may take generations for it to reach fruition, but the world awaits the outcome of your faithfulness and your obedience to God. And just like Abraham, if he could see what hung in the balance with his faithfulness to God in this moment, it would be easy. And just like that for you and I, if we could see the other side of our faithfulness to God, it would be easy, one foot in front of the other, to obey the general that is leading us, even in the most difficult moments of life. Well, this image of the shield, this is the covenant, this is the promise, I will be your shield. It's an enduring image for the people of God. And so David, the great king of Israel, Abraham, Moses, David, all on the Mount Rushmore of the nation of Israel, this is an enduring image for him. And similar to Abraham in Psalm, David finds himself in crisis after crisis. And the image that he uses, or the metaphor that he uses for God, time and time again, Father, yes, King, yes, but shield. God, I want you to be a shield. Well, in Psalm chapter 3, we see David in a crisis that he's never quite been in before. He's well along in years, and he's essentially been deposed as king. His son Absalom, it's a fascinating story. Absalom was the beloved son of King David. And although David was a great king, he was a terrible father. And Absalom was angry at him for some things that had happened in the house. And this is a very R-rated story, if you know the story. But Absalom goes to the city gate and essentially amasses an army against his father. And people would come to him and say, your dad's not a good king. And Absalom would say, you're right, he's not a good king. And eventually he gets enough people, powerful people, to overthrow David. And so they're going after David. They're trying to kill him. He's been deposed essentially as father, but also as the king. And it's a crisis. He's anxious, he's fearful, and he's on the run when we find him. He's hiding, he's not quite sure what's going to happen. And here in the Psalms, I want you to notice in a few moments the image that he uses and the metaphor that he returns to for who God is and what God is like. Psalm chapter 3, we'll start in verse 1. O Lord, I have so many enemies. So many are against me, David says. He's anxious. This is not just fear. This is anxiety that is setting in. So many are saying God will never rescue him. God will never rescue David. Which this is not a crisis of the moment for David. This is a crisis of identity. He takes great pride in being a father, and yet his son is after him. He takes great pride in being a king, yet he's lost his kingdom. He's terrified in this moment. And he says, they're saying about me, God's not going to save me. He's essentially saying they're saying about me, I'm like Saul, the king that David had replaced. I'm no good to you, God. And it's a crisis of identity. It's not just a temporary moment. There's a huge difference, and you probably know this, between fear and anxiety. Clinically, there's a huge difference between those two. And fear is a certain layer down of a certain kind of emotion. Anxiety is the next level of it. Fear is it's specific. You can point to what you're afraid of. Fear is something you need. We often talk about fear. Well, fear is always bad, but it's not. You need fear. You need fear of oncoming traffic. You need fear in moments. And actually, fear allows you to sort of summon the courage or the energy to face something and to get through something. And it's specific. It comes and it goes. My 6-year-old son, Hayden, right now is learning to ride a bike. And when he's on the bike, he's always terrified that he's going to fall off. That's fear. That's not anxiety. That fear, and you know this, will eventually cause him to learn and to be able to actually ride the bike, because that fear is needed to sort of get the courage to face and press into it, and being afraid of falling off will eventually allow him to stay up. You need that kind of fear. Anxiety is different than that. Anxiety is not specific. It's diffuse. It sort of leaks into everything. It's lingering. It stays. It just hangs out in life. Fear will galvanize you for action. And many of us, you know this is true. Anxiety will paralyze you and keep you from action. And it's this reminder, it's this sense, anxiety is the sense that life is fragile. Who am I? What am I doing? How is it? I don't even see the purpose in anything. In this moment, that's essentially where David is. He feels fragile. This is not a crisis of the moment for him. This is a crisis of identity. Fear is like a thunderstorm. It comes in, but it eventually moves out. Anxiety it's like a drizzle, 35 degrees and steady and constant. And the more it's there, it just eventually mildews the soul, doesn't it? It keeps you from seeing reality and truth as it actually is. It decays. And David is teetering into the realm of anxiety. This past week, a really well-known author, Elizabeth Wurtzel, passed away far too young. I think she was around 52 years old or so. Elizabeth Wurtzel in 1994, before anybody really had specific language for this, wrote a classic book. It was called Prozac Nation. Very depressing book, by the way. But she passed away this last week. And in Prozac Nation, I don't know if there's any Gen Xers here. A few of you. Like 3 Gen Xers. Are you kidding me? You listened to Kurt Cobain on your way here? Anyone? The same way that Kurt Cobain was sort of the music voice, Elizabeth Wurtzel was really the literary voice for that same kind of angst and pain that sort of defined some of those moments of the 90s, grunge rock. And I remember reading this book. It's a true story. I used to sneak into Walden Books when my mom was at the mall, and I would read things that I was not supposed to read. And Prozac Nation was one of them. And this is, I was a very odd 8th grader, by the way. And this is one of the things she says in this book. And this is really the state of anxiety. Homesickness is just a state of mind for me. I'm always missing someone or someplace or something. I'm always trying to get back to some imaginary somewhere. My life has been one long longing. And the book is just that, over and over. She's bleeding out. She's defining her chaos. The reason I say that, that's David here. He's anxious, he's longing, he's wanting, he's not, there's this sort of bottom of the pit of fear. Now he's in anxiety. And it's his identity. He's fragile. He doesn't know what to do. But notice what he prays in the metaphor that he returns to. You turn with me to verse 3 of this. Psalm 3, the very next line, to sort of lift his eyes from the pit of anxiety. He says, "But you, O Lord, are what? A shield around me. You are my glory, the one who holds my head high." So on the other side of this difficulty, God holds my head high. You are my glory. I cried out to the Lord, he says, and he answered me from his holy mountain. And notice what he says. He says, God, you are a shield not to me, not for me, but you are a shield what? Around me. We don't know a lot about shields in the modern world, not a current military tactic that you see. Most of what we know about shields comes from movies, if we're honest, whether it's 300 or Gladiator or Braveheart. That's sort of our knowledge of shields. And in the ancient world, this metaphor would have a lot more power because they would know there's really two kinds of shields. There's the kind that you wear on your arm, and you have a sword, and you use it in hand-to-hand combat. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. There's... I'm going to just keep telling that joke. It's so good. There's that kind of shield. That's hand-to-hand combat. You're defending yourself, but you're also attacking. There's another kind of shield you've probably seen in films before that is not on your arm. It's the size of a door. And you use it, you've probably seen this in 300, the troops advancing behind Leonidas, where they are crouched down and you can't carry a sword. All you can hold up is this door shield that goes around you. And you only use this kind of shield when you are expecting boulders and hot lava to be dumped on you. And you only use it when you are trusting with full confidence that the general you follow knows what he's doing and is not leading you like a lamb to a slaughter, but actually is fighting for some worthy cause, is actually doing something that on the other side of it is a victory, an inheritance, a benefit to you, and you trust the general. And the difficulty that we have is God has said to us, I will be your shield. I will not be your beach towel. I'm not going to spare you from the conflicts, the anxieties of life. But here's what you need to be expectant of. I will use the difficulties of life, and what you do and what I do in these moments is we have to trust the general. That in these moments, the most anxious, the most fretful, like David does, God, I trust that although the hot lava of life is currently searing my skin, although the boulders of life are raining down on me and I don't want to be in these circumstances, I'm trusting with confidence and expectancy the faithfulness of the general who is not going to waste any of this. And even in life, the most difficult moments of life, it should occur to us that even when we're wounded, even when we've lost friendships, even when we are injured and we don't like it, our God is the kind of general who does not waste any of that pain. And if you've been injured, it's to protect you from future injuries. If you've been wounded, it's to protect you from something later. He's not wasting any of that. He's the kind of general. Some of us today, you find yourself in moments of life where you look down at your feet and you're standing in circumstances you don't want to be in. It could be at work, it could be job loss, it could be frustration at work, and you don't know what to do. And it would be easy in these moments to shortcut on your character, to do something back to the person who did something to you. And it's harder, isn't it, to trust with confidence that you're following a good and faithful general, that God is actually at work in this circumstance. Some of us, it's at home. It could be with a son or a daughter. There's some kind of conflict. There's some kind of frustration. And you feel immense difficulty, and you're staring down at your feet, and you're praying, God, be a father, take this away. And here's his guarantee to you. I will be your shield around you. In this moment when the hot lava of life is dumping down on you, I'm not going to take it away, but I will use it. And on the other side of this, there is some kind of inheritance. There's some kind of benefit that you can't see yet. And all you need to do, this is the covenant. God says, I will be torn to pieces before I allow this to have the last word over your life. And I want you to keep moving forward and advancing into this difficulty and into this storm. It could be you're looking at the next year or 2 years of life. Maybe you have a baby that's on the way, and you're going, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't feel prepared. I feel like this is right, but it's a crisis of identity. I don't feel like I could be a good mom, a good father. Hear the voice of the general say to you, keep advancing and keep moving forward. And although in seasons or stages of life, it feels like the boulders are raining down, trust with confidence and expectancy the goodness and the kindness of the general that you're following. He's not going to waste any of that difficulty and any of that pain. And so David says what Abram had said, God, you are my shield, even in this crisis. And it would be easy for many of us in the circumstances you're in to cut and run. It would have been easy for David in this moment to go to a pagan nation and a pagan king, make a deal, annihilate Absalom. But he doesn't do that. He continues to say, God, I'm going to rest in you. I'm going to lean on you. I'm going to trust that you are my shield in this difficulty. And although I'm filled with anxiety, I'm also filled with expectancy about what you're going to do on the other side of this. And we know from the perspective of history, Jesus Christ comes into this world not through the sword of Absalom, does he? He comes into this world through the house of David. It's through the house of David and the faithfulness of David. And if David could have seen that, it would have been easy to hide under the shield and allow the lava of life to dump down because he knew what was coming through his faithfulness and that the world awaited his faithfulness to God. And the same is true for you. The same is true for me. Some of us today, you're standing in circumstances, it could be in your marriage, where you have decided this is the year, this is the season, you're not going to sweep it under the rug. You are going to deal with the difficulty that is in front of you. You're going to go to counseling. You're going to address it. You're going to actually face this. And it feels in this moment, you're leaning and pressing into the difficulty of it. And it feels, it would be so much easier to cut and run. You've had friends who have abandoned marriages for far less reasons than what you are standing in the middle of. And yet something in you says we're going to continue to obey. We're going to continue to press in. It's worth it. And your kids and future generations of your family await your faithfulness in these difficult moments of life. And you can't see that from where you're standing. All you feel is your skin searing, the boulders that are coming down. Some of us, it could be a personal issue in life, an addiction, something that you've struggled with, and you have said, you know what, this is the moment, a line in the sand, maybe it's do or die. I'm going to deal with this. I'm not going to ignore it. And you're in this stage where 2 weeks into the new year, all the articles say this is the time people abandon, but not so with you. You're going to continue to lean into the difficulty. You're not going to cut and run because you trust that on the other side of this, there is some kind of inheritance. And I promise you, your kids await your faithfulness to God. Your wife awaits your faithfulness to God. Your business partners await your faithfulness to God. And if you could see what hung in the balance with continuing to pray and lean into God as your shield, obedience to the general would be the easiest choice you ever made. On the other side of it, there's some kind of benefit. It could be God's called you into something big this year. Earth-shaking, earth-changing change is going to flow through you in your life. I met a woman last week, I believe it was after our 11:30 service. She came up to me and she said God has called her to Japan to deal with and to help in the prison population there. If you know anything about the socioeconomics of Japan, the elderly are being imprisoned at alarming rates. And she said, I feel like God's calling me there. And as she told the story, she was terrified, of course, scared, but there's a trusting. God will be my shield in this, and I don't know what, and I don't know how, and I don't know when, but on the other side of it, generations will be impacted because of my faithfulness. And for many of us in this room, the same thing is true. Generations will be impacted by your faithfulness in this moment. And just like with Abraham, you can't see the inheritance, the reward, the benefit, and the power that is currently flowing through you. And the promise to you is in these moments, I will be your shield. I will constantly be with you. This will not be the end of the story. I'll use it. I'm going to do something with it. And you have to trust and obey and lean into the general and marching forward. That's always been the metaphor for the people of God. We know something hangs in the balance with our faithfulness to God. And the world awaits the outcome of our faithfulness. You see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in the moment of difficulty as he knows he's headed to the cross. Mark chapter 14, you see Jesus, he's with his three, and there he is. And the scriptures and other instances say he's sweating drops of blood. He's anxious. He's terrified. He knows what's coming. He's headed to the cross. And notice what he says. Notice the way in which he prays. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. Verse 34 of Mark chapter 14. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. He goes a little further away. He fell to the ground and he prayed to God, if it's possible, the hour might pass from him. Verse 36, Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. He's talking about the cross here. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Not my will, but your will be done. And he knows in this moment, he will literally be torn to pieces at the cross. But he knows what is on the other side of it is resurrection. He knows on the other side of it, if he continues to follow the thread into the greatest obstacle of his life, on the other side of this is resurrection, so that what will be possible for you as the children of God, this covenant that was made through Abraham, flows to you and to me through Jesus Christ, flows through his body being ripped apart on the cross, that God is always at work, God is always doing something, and no matter what the difficulty is, on the other side of it, there is resurrection for you. New creation. A new thing will be born through the difficult thing that you're facing. And even in the most anxious, fretful, I don't understand moments, as the people of God, we continue to lean into that picture. God, you're my shield. You're not my beach towel. It's not the cool, steady breezes I was hoping for. But I know you're not going to waste this. And I know you're doing something. And I know you're at work. And I know on the other side of my faithfulness is an outcome that will impact generations, will impact my kids, will impact the people around me. And you're using every bit of it, God, because that's the kind of general that you are. Let's pray together, and then we're going to sing together. God, we thank you. I wish today that you called yourself the sword that annihilates the enemies. But God, you do promise us this. You will be the shield. You will be the one that we can go to, we can run to, we can hide behind. And that doesn't keep us free from difficulty and storms, but it does ensure us that we're following a general who always wins. And we're following a God who has a panoramic view of history. And he sees the beginning, he sees the end, he sees the way in which the faithfulness of this generation is used to impact the faith of the next. And God, I just pray, would we continue to lean in and press in corporately, individually, to whatever the hard thing is, whatever the anxious thing is, and not do it with a sense of this is going to have the last word, but would we do it with, I wonder how God's going to use this. What are you up to? Would we continue to be people of expectancy? It's in Jesus' name that we pray, and all of God's children said, amen. Let's sing together.